Hello everyone, welcome to our Egyptian online seminar group. First, hold off, then if you have any questions, you can ask our speaker after her presentation. I have great pleasure of welcoming dear Professor Jan Benton. Jan is one of the top sustainability thought leaders in the world. Jan Benton is a professor of accounting and the director of the Pentland Centre for Sustainability in Business at Lancaster University and focused on research around realizing the Sustainable Development Goals, motivations, and rationales for non-financial reporting and human rights. Her research has been published in top-ranking journals in accounting and finance. Now we will start our seminar with the Professor Jan Benton.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, and thank you for the invite, and congratulations for everyone to getting to a Friday in one piece and still having time to think about things. That's pretty non-trivial in a way. So I want to talk about accountability for corporate biosphere stewardship in the Anthropocene. So lots we're very familiar with the accountability and the provision of particularly non-financial reporting that might tell us something about environmental and social accountability. Um, Maybe we're really maybe quite familiar with the idea of stewardship, because stewardship is at the heart of accounting practice in terms of stewarding financial resources. So, this is obviously thinking about stewarding natural biosphere resources as well. But we're probably not very familiar with the idea of the Anthropocene, which is where I will start the presentation, nor with what corporate biosphere stewardship might entail. So, there's some familiar things in there, but then also a mix of things mixed together in different kind of ways. So I want to sort of give a sense as to why I've been puzzling about these ideas. And so this is a nice time to check with Mohammed that the slides have moved on, because they should have. Just if they haven't, then it looks good. Give me a thumbs up. Yep, excellent. Okay. So, like all ideas, they emerge from some literature that I've been reading for a long time and finding very engaging, but being slightly unsure about how it might relate to accounting. And that's the paper in the top right hand corner of this slide about transnational corporations and the challenge of biosphere stewardship. The authors of this paper are natural scientists, and in particular, they're what we would call Earth system scientists. So they're interested in how the whole of the Earth system operates. So the interaction between climate, between the oceans, between soils, trees, etc., etc. So their interest is in the natural environment and how it operates as a full system. Some years ago, and this paper was published in 2019, so it obviously took a wee while to put together, they started thinking about, well, what would that mean, particularly for transnational corporations, who are very large economic entities, but also entities that touch down in the physical spaces all across the globe. And so their work I find very engaging, because it makes you think about, well, could corporations be stewards of the biosphere wherever they might land? And that's not to say they're the only game in town. So governments really matter in this context, but likewise communities and civil societies. But transnational corporations in particular are there across all parts of the globe and the biosphere. They have centralized control processes with somebody, boards and directors who are thinking about how they might achieve the outcomes they're seeking. And if those outcomes included being stewards of the context within which they operate, then that would be quite a novel idea. So this idea is novel, it's imaginary, it's not describing what's going on now, but it's maybe describing something about what could go on. And so it's quite engaging and invigorating in that respect. For those of you who maybe don't know these scientists, these are the same group of scientists coming from the same institute that put together the planetary boundaries framework. So again, it's no accident that their work in that area made them think about, well, where are corporations in the planetary boundary conversation? So there's a connection there. So that's the first thing, a paper that's been around for a bit that I read that I found fantastic, and I didn't quite know what to do with it, which is the best possible papers, really, because they stimulate new thoughts. The second element, then, which is at the bottom of the middle of the screen, is something called Seafood Business for Ocean Stewardship. So there's that stewardship word again. So this is a practice collaboration between a set of companies that are working together to be able to bring about changes to the ocean environment. And they are seafood companies, so they're fishing, but they're also having aquaculture, etc., etc. So they are really an interesting practical example, which I am part of a science advisory team for, so I know quite a bit about them. And there are quite a few papers published about how does this initiative evolve and develop going forward. That was fine. I knew these two things were related, but then came the magic paper. So the paper in the top left-hand corner um, is a paper that made my mind explode in different places for thinking about how you might be able to articulate through some formal accounting and reporting process what are the impacts on a place from several companies who simultaneously operate in the same place. So this is really messing around with the idea of boundaries and the entity, and talking about how do we get a place-based larger scale account of how corporations are helping, in this case, the agri-food sector. So these three things have come together and caused me to think about things in a new way. So, Rebecca and Nadine, super scholars. I'm so pleased they wrote their paper. I'm so pleased I bumped into it because it made me think about the world in a different way. So where I'm going to go today then with those prompts for finding those new ideas is I'm going to talk a little bit about biosphere stewardship. I'm going to talk about the CBOS example, and then I'm going to focus on mainly on reporting. So we're back into very much the bread and butter of things that we know and we understand, looking at how reports might construct knowledge and expectations around groups of corporations, and then what might that knowledge and expectation be? And in particular, what does it prompt when we think about how does accountability might be discharged for natural capital interactions? So that's where we're going. So this is the most interesting diagram in the paper. And this data comes from about 2017, 2018. And I know that the research team are updating this at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see what it looks like. So let me talk you through what's happening on the outer edges of it. On the right-hand side, you've got all the hard materials, so platinum, palladium, cobalt, nickel, etc., etc. So these are hard materials that are mined somewhere in the world and which form the basis for a large number of the things that you and I have. So phones, renewable energy technologies, etc., etc. And then in the bottom corner, there are the fossil fuel elements, so oil and gas and cement. Across on the left-hand side, on the outer edge, then you've got a bunch of sectors who, if you like, are moving the living resources around the mix. So you might broadly think of the right-hand side as being about nature interactions, whereas the left-hand side is about biodiversity, the living part of the ecosystem. And again, there's a series of products, and not all possible products of the world, but products for which they could find data, including things like paper and board, palm oil, coke, etc. Then the fish, so the farm salmon and the wild capture, agri-chemicals, and then animal pharmaceuticals. So taken together, and the numbers on the inside are the number of companies that they've identified in each one of these sectors that make up these market concentrations. So they're using a way of saying, of looking at how many companies are involved in mobilizing how much of the turnover of an industry. So if I sort of do an example, then at the top right-hand side, 5 companies have 91% of the turnover of a platinum industry. So that means that if those 5 companies decide to do something different, then something different happens in that industry if they choose to work on something collectively. But that's quite different if you go across to the left-hand top corner, where 10 companies have 25% of paper and board. So the possibilities of those companies coming together and creating corporate biosphere stewardship is much less because the concentration's lower, and 10 companies influencing 25% wouldn't be bad, but it's not going to make a big difference. And so you've got then all sorts of other things in there. Some of the quite high. So 3 cocoa companies have 60% of the industry's turnover. 4 companies have 84% of the pesticides turnovers. So you can see what they're trying to do here. They're trying to figure out whether or not there's a number of transnational corporations who might, between them, be able to steward a resource wherever it is mined or grown in the world. And in total, the total number of companies, if you add them all up, is just shy of 200. And so this then suddenly makes the job a little more tractable. So you don't have to change the behavior of, 50,000 firms everywhere in the world, but it might be that this smaller set of firms could, with the right engagement and conversation, become biosphere stewards in some ways. So, I mean, that's a pretty open question. The only 2 sectors where this particular team have had a go at working it out is in the farm salmon and the wild capture. And so, a lot of what I'm going to talk about later on is in that seafood context, because this, if you like, was part of the framing to then deciding to be able to build and to work with the seafood businesses for ocean stewardship. So the biosphere is in the hands of a few, that they have enormous ability to influence, control, for better or for worse, all sorts of activities across the globe. So when we've been trying to think about, well, what would it then mean if you're a corporation? What would it mean to be a biosphere steward? And so this is where we've been working with a whole set of ideas, working them up with various people, and then looking at bringing them together in some ways. So we would say that there are 3 things that might need to happen, because it's not just a case of saying to those 200 firms, you could be better, boof, they're better. That's not the way it works. So we've been trying to think about what would enable one of those 200 firms to be able to move forward and being more of a steward and less extractive in their activities. So the first capability that we think we would need is for both conceptual and practical knowledge about how a corporate activity is linked to the biosphere. So the first one is, conceptual acceptance that corporations are embedded in and not separate from the biosphere. And if that's the case, then obviously you'd think about the world in quite a different way if you're a corporate manager. But then you need to know which biosphere and where are you connected. And so hence we would say that the development of traceability systems would be really important to be able to geospatially locate where on the globe that your activities arise. Now that sounds like a big ask, and it is indeed it's not an easy thing to do. But many companies are now starting to do this, to know exactly where they're, for example, acquiring soy. And some of this is driven by regulations, in terms of, if you want to bring some products into the EU's market, then they can't be associated with deforestation. So then for you need to know where your soy is coming from, where you're growing cattle, for example, and whether or not it's been involved in deforestation in the Amazon. So some of that access to market data is causing companies to map exactly what they're doing and where they're doing it in the world. And then even though the EU omnibus proposal is sort of narrowing down the scope of a lot of activities, there's a lot of national regulation about due diligence and supply chains. Now, that due diligence is often focused on human rights, but it's also due diligence in terms of environmental impacts as well. So, corporations are more likely to be developing these traceability systems so they can do their due diligence. Now, both of those are sort of, partly market, sort of driven, but there's also good operational reasons to know exactly where you're acquiring your raw materials, because the competition for materials is so enormous. And understanding, for example, disease outbreaks or problems with managing to catch fish as the oceans warm up and you get sort of heat spikes in them become very important. So procurement teams usually have a fairly good grip on exactly where everything comes from. So in this one, there's a conceptual bit and a practical bit to know that you're embedded in the landscape. The second one then is a sort of a values-based orientation. So a steward probably wants to think about and value the biosphere beyond just business exchange. So there might be a slightly wider sense of valuing nature in the biosphere, and the ability to think about that in a more holistic way. And then the second part is a normative orientation to extend responsibilities further. Now, in some ways, that normative orientation in the development of traceability systems is working hand in hand for many, many firms and practice at the moment, because as soon as you get into tracing your supply chains, you'll start to think about, well, do I have the ability to leverage different behaviors along the supply chain, particularly ones that I don't like? Do I have agency, either on my own with other people, to deal with problems in the supply chains? So working through one, two, three. One is you're connected. Two is that connection causes you to think about your activities in a different way. And part three is about whether or not anyone else thinks about those connections in a different way. So I really like the phrase, which comes from management colleagues who are working in the sociology of markets. Is the idea that we might have markets for responsibility. So there are places where people are traded, materials are bought and sold, etc., where there are elements of responsibility entailed. So, for example, capital markets have markets for responsibility built within them. So if you wanted to be on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index or the FTSE for Good or any one of these other kind of indices that happen around stock markets, then that's a market for responsibility of some sorts. Likewise, if you are being rated by ESG firms and seen to be best in class, even though that practice might be waning a bit at the moment, people are still undertaking that activity, and that market for responsibility is sorting out companies into those that are more likely to contribute as opposed to less likely to contribute to biosphere stewardship. So this slide is really to say that it's that the earlier ones saying, well, here's these 200 companies, we might hope they do something different. This is trying to say, well, how might you hope they do something different? So what are the values, the norms, the regulatory framework, whether that be binding regulation or voluntary regulation, what does the data require, etc., to be able to even think about the world in this way? So I think it's probably also really important to say that this is a non-trivial list. It's not a list that will just poof, we can do it and it will happen. So we've also been thinking about, well, if you wanted this market for responsibility, what would be in there? And here we start heading towards things that look much more like accounting and accounting devices that might allow us to understand those things. So the reformation of markets for responsibility, we would argue, at least it would include probably other things, is the provision of impact information by those who are creating the impact. Now, this is not very controversial, I don't think, especially among the audience I'm talking to today. But things like the long-standing Global Reporting Initiative and all sorts of other initiatives that require you to report information on your impact would fit within here. But within here as well, there's also mandatory information, particularly if you're operating in a well-governed space. There might be things that you have to do if you have a spill, or if you harm an animal, or if you, end up burning down a part of the forest or whatever. So there's also information that goes to regulatory bodies as well. It's not all just going into a financial market. There'll be information going to regulatory markets as well. Then you need a bunch of data about the impacts of corporations, probably collected by others in the landscape. So this is a very long-standing practice that's existed within the accounting scholarship, which is often caught under the title of accounts. So these are people by looking at it from the outside. So some of these accounts might be driven by NGOs, so they might be quite antagonistic and looking for, conflicting with the picture the organisation draws of itself. Other ones might be more, straightforward mapping of where things are and what's happening. So there are amazing data resources of this type, and I think it's really important that we remember that those data resources are out there. So there's a resource that maps every mine in the world. Okay, so in that respect, it makes it easy for somebody to be able to see where you are compared to other people. Now, what I want to check is that everyone is still there. I can see some people still moving, but I got a message up on mine saying, "Whoops, something went wrong." Is everything okay out there?
I think it just froze for a moment, but now it's okay.
Okay. Okay, that's good. Okay, well, I won't leave and then rejoin the meeting, because that would be that would be a bit distressing. Okay. So number 3 on this list then is any formal requirements in corporate governance. So in that respect, corporate governance requirements are focusing more on some of these other kind of aspects, etc. Some of them are really then focused around the risk that's associated with that. So things like the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures, Task Force on Climate-related Financial Disclosures are part and parcel of that same thing. I see something in the chat, so...
Yeah, sorry, it's me. The presentation's now frozen for me. What about everybody else?
Well, I haven't moved it on recently, so it should be on a slide with what is the market for responsibility.
I don't see it. Does anybody else see it? Do you see it, Mohammed?
Yes, I see it.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a problem with me. It's a problem with me, sorry.
It's all right. It's all right. Yeah.
Maybe I'm going to go out and come back in.
Okay. I mean, the virtual world is amazing, but it does also have fraught things. Going further down this list, you've got a voluntary landscape of things that you might do, so product certification, etc., all of those sorts of things. And then there is what I find a really interesting set of activities that you don't see much of, but for which there's a little bit of work, looking at ranking and rating of organisational performance. So that might be either rating of performance or rating of reporting. So that, if you like, is the information intermediation process that we see in capital markets, but we might also see it in these markets as well. And then you've got both financial and non-financial rankings of various sorts. So I'm heroically going to try to change the slide. So with all that in place, I now want to introduce you to the Seafood Business for Ocean Stewardship, CBOS. It's quite an unusual gathering, but it's not the only gathering of its sort. So what this is that there's a cohort of companies who have decided to work together. They're all very large companies, so it's back to that transnational corporation focus. But the hope and the belief is that if they work together to reformulate what appropriate behavior is and what stewardship behavior might be, then they might be able to transform their sectors in which they operate. So this is where the corporate biosphere stewardship paper and this paper are linked together, because this is the guys that were identified in that wee blue bit of the circular thing. And in particular, I'm interested in the role that transparency might have to provide evidence of their progress towards outcomes. So just sort of say, who are they? So this is a slightly older slide because one of the companies have left. So it's 8 companies now, but between them, they have quite a large number of subsidiaries, but they also have a large percentage of operations. So it's following that idea of corporate biosphere stewardship, where we're trying to see organizations with large shares of the market. Between them, they have about, almost 20% of the international trade in seafood products. So then they're a pretty significant bunch of companies, and they're trying to work together to think about how they might become biosphere stewards of the ocean. And you can also see from this that they're headquartered in quite unusual companies compared to what we usually look at, but they are also really interesting companies in terms of operating everywhere in the world. So they've got that transnational character to them. So in the reporting landscape for the CBOS companies, there's 3 things that are going on within that. In the first one, they produce their own reports. So they have that reporting by each member company. They all use some of them do it in ESG reports, others do it in sustainability reports. So a bunch of different reports in terms of how they gather their data. They also provide a combined report in terms of how the initiative as a whole has met its objectives, and then how does each company look like within that total project. So that's kind of interesting as well, because they have this combined impact report. Okay, so I will try going back. Has the slide changed for you yet?
Actually, the slides didn't change, Jan, for me and Salah. There is no CPOS slide even for myself. I'm not sure about the others.
Right. Okay. Mohammed, can you help me with that at all as to what you think might be going on?
Yes. Could you please try to share?
Yeah, I have gone back and forward, but my slides are changing, but yours aren't changing by the sound of it. Should I stop sharing and reshare?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Yes, you can stop sharing and share again.
There we are. Okay. So I've stopped sharing, and what I'll do is I'll try to share again. We also have a backup in that Mohammed has my slides in case everything goes terribly wrong. But let's try this first of all. Is that any better?
Yeah, now makes sense. I can see the CPOS. We can just need to see the previous slides if it's available to show the audience about the CPOS.
Yeah. So shall I start there? I'll go from current slide. How's that? Are we on CBOS together?
Yeah, now.
Yes.
Thank you, Salah. Thank you. So this gives you, I've narrated it, but this makes a lot more sense when you can see these are the dark blue are where the companies are headquartered. They're in countries that are big in seafood, so particularly Thailand, Norway, Japan, and the Republic of Korea, but then also one company in the US. They have a lot of fish passes through these groups. Then they each have a GRI report. They have a collective report, and I'm going to look at the collective report next to sort of see how it might function. They also operate within a information intermediation landscape, because they are affected by norms that are put together by other people. The main one being they are ranked together with some other companies in something called the Seafood Stewardship Index, which is an index that's created by the World Benchmarking Alliance, and it rates the transparency of corporations which are within their set. So in that respect, if you like, they're subject to pressure to provide information to other people, and the World Benchmarking Alliance isn't the only one. And with my fingers crossed, I'm going to move to the next slide. So hopefully you've got the next slide. If you haven't, let me know and we can try to sort it out. So there are 2 reports that CBOS have produced. The first one in 2022 was a progress report. So it was basically saying, hello, we exist. These are the things that we're trying to do, etc. So if you like, there wasn't data in it that told you about detailed information about the actual impact they've had or progress towards their targets, but it laid it out. And it was sort of a combined report of several years before up until 2022. Well, they produced in 2023 and they're going to produce again at the end of this year, so it will come out in 2026, is a combined report that actually looks at their impact. And it's that impact report that I'm going to describe to you as a way that we might be able to think about information provision in the kind of format that we would understand as environmental and social accountants, and as a way of discharging collective accountability for a set of activities. So this is the big picture. So we should have, hopefully you can see the big picture of CBOS goals in action. So these are the areas that they're trying to work on together because they are a problem in the industry. So illegal, IUU stands for illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. So this is where you're fishing stocks and causing an undermining of the fish health. Modern slavery or forced labor, depending on what kind of language you like to use, is endemic within the seafood industry. So they have worries about that, not purely in their own operations, but certainly along their supply chains. They, because they're scooping up creatures out of the sea, they're worried about endangered species and catching them as bycatch. Because they're raising animals in cages and they're quite close together, they sometimes have to use antibiotics in order to be able to ensure the animals are healthy, but that creates problems. Potential problems with regard to antimicrobial resistance, particularly as the ocean warms up. That's kind of tricky. And then they also want to reduce ocean plastics. So these are the commitments that they have made to try to collectively achieve them. They provide some data there for joint activities, but they've got more data than this in the impact report. But this is sort of their high level selection of measures, for one measure for each one of these categories. And what they're doing here, if you like, is a collective report about the extent to which they have been better stewards because they've been working together to try to achieve it. So how do you deliver that message? Because that's quite a sophisticated message that you might like to try to deliver to the world. So this is how they do it. So for each one of those issues, there's a 4-part element within their report. So part number 1, starting in the top left-hand corner. So I have to sort of think where it is. Not very good with my left and right. So top corner, number 1. For each issue, there is a page, and these are just snippets from those pages that describes the issue, the management approach, and then more detailed goals. So you've got that high-level goal that ends up as a total, but here are more detailed ones. The second page they present for each one of these issues is they talk about the impact and what they've been doing to try to address that impact. And they've got their actions over the far right-hand side of that top right-hand quarter. The third thing they do then is a series of case studies to try to give you a deep dive and a really sort of good feel for what's going on. Now, because this is a joint initiative, they also try to make sure that each one of the member companies have some case study, because this is their showcase as well. So there's all sorts of things there about what they've been doing. And then the final bit in the bottom left-hand corner is the science outlook. So because this initiative is a partnership between a group of scientists and a group of companies, then this science element is in there. If it was any other kind of initiative, so say a bunch of corporations got together in order to try to do something better, you wouldn't expect number 4. But number 4 is there because of the science business nature of this body. So that's the front end of their report, where for each one of those issues, you run through these 4 cycles of how how we're going about it, what have we done, some colourful case studies so you can really see what that means on the ocean, and then a scientific assessment. But that's only half the report. I think the really interesting thing happens in the other half of the report. So in the other half of the report, each one of the member companies, and this is Cargill, who's a very large food company, and it has a subsidiary element, which is the Cargill Aqua Nutrition. So it's the guys that are doing feeds just for fish. They're part of the initiative, and so the CEO signs up. They talk about key initiatives, but the right-hand side is a really interesting bit. So what CBOS has created is a monitoring and reporting framework for how you fit as a member of that initiative amongst the various criteria that you're trying to achieve. So you've got, greenhouse gas emissions, plastic pollution, antibiotics, etc. So the topic areas are those topic areas. The rest of the material, in terms of the actual measurements, have of benchmarking alliance, the GRI requirements, and then any other relevant requirements that the firms face. So if you like, it's taking all of those legal sources of normativity and sort of shuffling them and sort of mixing around a bit and think, okay, here are the things that are really relevant for us. So it's a customized monitoring and reporting framework from pre-existing norms about corporate responsibility. And then the firms say how they're doing against those elements. Now on this one, it is entirely filled out. On some of the other, but some of them are also not relevant. So on endangered species, they're looking at GRI 301.4, says Cargill doesn't own, lease, or manage operational sites in or adjacent to areas of high biodiversity value. So you can have a disclosure like that says this indicator is important. It's not important for us, and we don't have anything to disclose there. For some of the other companies, for some of these elements, they decline to disclose it on commercial confidentiality grounds. And that's absolutely fine as well, because it has to be okay for them to feel happy about providing the information. And that differs because these organizations, while they're all involved in seafood, are involved in it's a very diverse set of activities. So you wouldn't expect anyone to be doing the same thing. Here as well, what you have tucked in here is also the links to Cargill's GRI report. So if you wish to then say, well, this is kind of interesting, I want to go through and see more about Cargill, then you can go to their report. So you're starting to get these interlocking reports, a report on a monitoring and reporting framework against some kind of criteria, a combined report about what these organizations have achieved together, and then the ability to dive down into the individual company report to see how they've done everywhere they operate in the world. So these accounts are all very different, but they are also complementary to each other. And if you looked at them in the round, they tell you some really interesting things and look quite different. And so I'm not doing that for you today, but you can look at these triangulating these accounts. But it's I want to show you some other examples of a sort. So this is not the only time it happens, and in particular, I want to show you. I think I've got 3 examples. I'm just turning over of where other sorts of things of that nature exist. So the first example. So hopefully everything's gone much more smoothly. We should be on a slide with the Global Salmon Initiative. So I anticipate that nobody on this call has ever heard of the Global Salmon Initiative, and there's no reason why you would. Actually, I see Madeline's on this call. She would have heard about it, but the rest of us probably haven't at all. So in that respect, this is
Again, Jan, I'm really sorry, Jan, but the slide is still stuck on the CPOS task forces. So I thought it's only for me, but I think some others also say that. The CPOS goals, the 5 goals.
Okay.
Sorry for that. I know you mean about the
yeah. So I can when it sticks for anyone, let me know, because it probably sticks for everyone. So I'm incredibly sorry about that. But please don't let me carry on talking if you're not seeing it.
I sent message, but I think it was in the wrong place.
All right. No, there's
Yeah,
no
now
message.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, did you see this one?
It's working now. GSI.
You're now on the GSI.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to go back a wee bit. Did you? I'll go resume. So this is the one that looked at their collective reporting. This is the pattern of reporting in terms of the 4 parts that are provided for by each individual element. Then here is the individual company reports with the monitoring and reporting framework and the data that they provided underneath each one. And from here, you can get down to their own reports. So hopefully with those pictures, and if it ceases to move, please let me know, because obviously something really weird's going on today. But this is not the only one. So I want to introduce you to another one that does these same sorts of things. Thanks, Tarek. The thumbs up is really reassuring. I appreciate that. So the Global Salmon Initiative is an industry initiative. So as a company, you're free to join it. You don't have to, but it's a voluntary industry initiative. And what happens is that a series of companies join it because they can learn from each other, they can share best practice, etc. So it's useful to them in their operational sense. So what happens is that every year the GSI produce an annual report about what has happened with regard to the companies that are members of it. So they look at key trends. They talk about, in this one they're looking at farm salmon's role in a sustainable food system, etc. But the thing that really interests us in here is the data deep dives, where they provide company level data across 15 key indicators for everyone who is involved in that initiative. So hopefully we're now on the slide that says data deep dive. Just tell me if it's not. If it is, I shall just keep on going. Excellent. Thanks, Stuart. So the way they do this is that they provide the data by country. So this is quite important because where you might farm salmon and the impact of salmon will depend on where you're raising it. So this is where accounting for nature is really quite a more complicated set of accounting than, say, accounting for climate change, because nature matters about where physically it is in the world. So for their members, they're operating in the countries that are listed across the top. And in some of them, for example, there's only one company there. So the Faroes and Scotland just have the one company. For others, there are several companies, and Chile would be a very good example of that. Ditto Norway with 3, whatever. So what happens for each one of the companies in each one of the countries is that you get this kind of information. So this is Bakkafrost. Is actually owned out of the Faroe Islands, but it has activities in Scotland. So here are your sustainability indicators. So you've got environmental and social indicators listed there. And so these are the same indicators that everyone provides information against. So you're back to sort of looking at the monitoring and reporting framework that CBOS had. This is a similar kind of thing. And you can see that depending on when you joined the initiative, so this company didn't join until 2020, so they had no data to offer before that. And then after 2020, no incidents to report, etc. So this incidents to report is fish escapes. So this happens when the cages that the salmon are being raised in, for some reason, get damaged and fish escape into the natural environment. Now that's a problem because the salmon, they can interbreed and they can cause all sorts of problems as a result of it. So this is why, if you like, where you operate really matters and farm escapes really matter. What you can also see here is that, for example, things happen for various reasons. So either severe weather, in which case you want to review your equipment, vandalism, and then third one I always like, because some seal bit a hole and started eating the salmon and they got out. Okay, so in that respect, if you like, that's quite a natural thing. Now, what I will say about seals and salmon is that if that happened and you shot a seal, No matter where you operate in the world, you'd have to report that within 24 hours to the regulatory authority, because you can't shoot seals because they're a protected species. So in that respect, that's an example I use to show that actually there's a whole bunch of reporting that as environmental accountants, I don't think we've ever really noticed, which is regulatory returns on particular activities to the regulating agency, in this case, the Environmental Protection Agency, wherever you're operating. You also have the same kind of pattern as you get with the CBOS. So moving on to this slide, you can see here's your cross-reference to the website of the company, but also their previous sustainability reports as well. So this data will be within those reports, but is not reducible to those reports. So you've got this sort of, again, interweaving of data for the purposes of a set of activities, like sustainable salmon in this case, as well as the wider company's impacts as well. So again, this pattern is there, which is the same as the CBOS pattern, and is quite interesting as to whether or not there are other features of the sort, and whether or not those features are shared. I'm using seafood as an example here, but there might be the same kind of features in mining or in forestry or wherever. So moving on to the the second example. This is a different example of a mediating organization that creates a market for stewardship behavior, or a market for responsibility. So the Ocean Disclosure Project is again something that if you wish to as a company, you might sign up to. You don't have to. It's a voluntary initiative, and what it does is it provides data on the ecological integrity of a company's activities. So I've got Bakkafrost up again. And this is where also it gets quite interesting, is that there may well be companies that are subject to reporting under several different frameworks. So actually looking at how they manage that collective reporting to all of these different places is an interesting question. So Bakkafrost, it doesn't have that many activities. It's quite a small number of activities, and what happens is that you tell the Ocean Disclosure Project what you're catching or raising and where are you catching it, and then hopefully the slide's moving on. Then what they do is they put alongside it a description of the production methods, whether or not there's any certifications associated with that fishery in that place caught by that method, and then sustainability ratings, which they draw from scientific literature. So here you've got an intertwining of a scientific literature with economic activities in a particular place, catching a particular fish using a particular methodology. And all of those particular things, again, really matter when you're dealing with nature and biodiversity, because where it happens really matters. And you might be acquiring Atlantic mackerel, for example, and depending on the method that you use, you might have a different environmental impact as well. So this is a way of trying to navigate that huge complexity, and then there's some sort of rating. What I also quite like about it is that they don't just give one rating. They look wherever there might be ratings and gives you an array of options to look at. So this isn't sort of like a checklist that you could use and then wander off and feel like, well, it's all done. But if you like, it's an invitation to start your discovery about this company. If you're a supermarket, for example, you might be buying materials from them, and to try to understand the ecological conditions under which their activities have taken place. I'll just show you another wee example of this because it's worth seeing. So in many countries, and I'm not sure where everyone on the call lives, but the Co-op is a big supermarket chain that you find in many different countries. They are managing, like a huge number of places. So in that top left right-hand corner, you can see that they have geospatially located everywhere where they're buying fish. So they know what they're doing. So this, if you like, is that, I'm purchasing things to sell in my supermarket. This is my map of where all of those materials come from. And then with the same way as the other one, they have all sorts of, by by species, by place, whether or not the sustainability ratings thinks they're good or not. And I really find this one quite interesting because here the sustainability ratings really disagree. And so again, that's important information to be able to start understanding that there might not actually be complete agreement about whether or not a particular fish caught in a particular place has good credentials or not. So in here, I've got, because it's quite, different ratings, they're telling you they're concerned about the cumulative impacts. And indeed, cumulative impacts, if you like, is where biosphere stewardship really comes to the fore, because it's not just your company, it's but all other companies operating in the same place. So in this model, you can't see who else is operating in the same place, as opposed to what you can see from the Global Salmon Initiative, but it gives you a different kind of cut of data through the system. Now, you might want to tell me this isn't accounting. I think this is accounting, or at least it's management information that feeds into our processes of being able to evaluate accountability. But it's really different from sustainability reports or ESG reports or providing information to the CDP or whatever. It's a really different kind of information provision. So the last thing I'm going to look at, and here I'm trusting that you're not going to be shy if you aren't seeing what's going on, is that this is a rating agency. It's the World Benchmarking Alliance, who rate a lot of organizations on a lot of different benchmarks. And they have a seafood stewardship index that they've produced. They produced it in 2019, 2021, and 2023. They have now wrapped this index up, but they've got other sorts of indices going forward. But what was interesting about this, particularly from a CBOS perspective, is that it rated 30 companies, which included all of the CBOS members, and then X number of others who are also large and in the same industry. So they rate very large organizations. So again, it's got a transnational corporate focus to it. And what they produce is they produce a report each time they do the benchmark. The benchmark is collaboratively built with those who are being benchmarked. There is, a gathering of data. There's checking that the data is correct, and a bit of back and forth between the benchmarkers and the companies. And then there's this global report about, for these companies, what's happening. This case, you can see they're saying "24 out of 30 have a commitment to traceability, implementation of the GDS traceability." But what they also do, as you can imagine with a rating agency, is that over a series of categories, governance, ecosystems, traceability, etc., you get a score, and then you can add that out of a score out of 100. So Thai Union is the best performing company in this cohort at just under 50% of the standard, sort of expectations. So in that respect, not tremendously good, but this is a market for responsibility as well, but of a different sort. It's not aimed necessarily at the financial system. It's aimed at something else. Now, I am going to see if things have held together. So we're down to our last two slides. So I've got a wee warning on my screen. So can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the slide change? We're back to talking about a paper. If not, I can leave and come back again. Thank you, Raman. That's really great. So this is really pushed me to see something different in a domain where I've been doing some work. So they identify that sustainability reporting is good for thinking about individual companies. Do they have management controls? Do they have policies? Do they enact them? What kind of activities do they do, and what kind of outcomes might arise from them? But it doesn't tell you whether or not, in combination in a particular ecosystem, whether or not all of the corporations operating there might be exceeding the ecological capacity or, again, creating a sustainable outcome. So their interest in what they were looking at in terms of the reporting activities that they reviewed and around the agri-food industry in Ireland was to see whether or not you could see that particular characteristic. They couldn't see it in that work. But it seems to me that some of the work that we've just looked at might be a way towards making sense of it. Now, it's not going to be complete because there will be other people operating salmon farms that aren't members of the Global Salmon Initiative in any one place. So in that respect, if you like, it won't be complete. The second thing that prompts for me is that usually we think sustainability reporting is about individual corporate performance, but it might not be. And the impact report that CBOS produces sort of shows that you can produce reports about collective impact. Now, that, of course, begs a question about what kind of reports do intercorporate initiatives where companies are joining together to achieve an outcome, what kind of reports do they produce? And there's not, yes, it's difficult to know, but there's not a lot of evidence about that form of reporting, or even if that reporting exists. So things like the Kimberley process, which is about conflict diamonds, through to all sorts of other normative projects that people are involved in. And then the final one is sort of saying, well, is there something here about these intersecting reporting formats that are helpful that somehow...
Jan.
Yep.
Yep. The slide again. Could you please stop and share it again? Share.
Okay. So are you still on the one with the 3 boxes?
Seafood companies on the index.
Right. Okay. Rightio. That's good to know. Right. I'll share it again. So have you now got three colourful boxes? Thank you. Brilliant. So I mean, these are not so complicated boxes, and so maybe I articulated them well enough in terms of this way of thinking about these different ways of reporting and what they might tell us. And now I'm so relieved to say I'm on my final slide, given it's been fighting me. Has it moved to the final slide with "to close" written on the top? Thank you. Brilliant. Yeah, okay. So to close, I can't believe how happy I am. I've got to the end of slides because now we can actually have a conversation. For me, thinking about these 3 ideas together has been really sort of quite arresting and quite interesting. And it brings me back to that idea, which I've been playing around with for a long time, and I'm not entirely certain what to do with it, which is, what does corporate biosphere stewardship in the Anthropocene look like? And what would be an adequate corporate reporting response to allow us to understand and articulate those ideas in the round? There may be lots of combined corporate reports that I have no idea about. The only reason I know about the fishy ones is because I've been involved in a 7-year project with some seafood ecologists. But there might be things that you know about that you've seen in your in whatever sector or industry that you're interested in terms of these combined corporate reports or intersecting reports, or reports generated by your voluntary norms bodies, etc. And in particular, it sort of brings me back to sort of a bit of a curiosity about, well, what do we call environmental reporting? Okay. So it certainly is that individual activity, but it might also be this collective activity as well. So that's where I will close the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing, which is much less stressful, and really keen to hear from folks, either, raising your hand, and Mohammed can certainly call on you, or write in the chat if you find that easier. We can respond in both ways. So thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Jan, for your contribution and your effort. It's really an excellent presentation. Thank you very much. Now, if anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your question. Enro, yeah, you have any questions?
I don't have any questions, but I've got 3 children that have just arrived home, so I'm probably going to have to leave. Okay. But it's really nice presentation and interesting to see all the different metrics and how it's used in a particular sector. So thank you for your presentation.
Not
Sorry,
at all,
I'm going to hide.
No. Yeah, I hope chaos at home is okay. Anyway, lovely to see you. Cherry, bye.
If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your question.
Yes, can I?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Jen, for your presentation. So it seems that those companies, multinational, are actually apparently very open to be accountable for what they're doing. So my question was a reflection. How can we make those accounts more, toward the benefit to the world, rather than the risk of masking, pursuing still profit maximization while appearing doing good to some extent. So I don't know, just a reflection could be also a part of your future research on this topic. So what's your view? Thank you.
Yeah. I think it would be unwise to think that transnationals aren't going to pursue profit. That's absolutely their functionality. Whether or not they maximize is another question, and indeed to maximize profit is quite a hard thing to even technically do if you're trying to do it. But then also, I suppose this is a thing with accounts in general, is that you could produce all of those accounts, and if no one reads them and no one uses them in their own decision making, or if there's no contestation of those accounts, if they're found not to be correct, etc., then if you like, that really reduces the ability of the formal question, even though we've been having accounts for a long time. I think it's a pretty open question as to whether or not accounts can be that then leverages corporate behavior. What it might do is create information so pressure groups could know who to general purpose, sustainability report. It's by no means useless. I'm not saying it's not good or not useful, but actually other things need to happen before it has a life that might lead to the change that we want. So I don't think we should oversell the reporting, but then neither should we undersell it, because it gives us some of a glimpse into the life of the organization and what they're trying to do. So they might, all of these things are available, but everyone I speak to in companies who writes corporate reports are not convinced anyone reads them except people on this call. Okay, so they're not sure about, maybe investors certainly are quite keen on bits of them. Academics read them, but then they're not sure who else does as well. So in some ways, sometimes I think being able to create an account is probably the biggest benefit an organization gets, because they have enough knowledge and expertise and understanding to be able to provide that account. So I think there's still a sort of a big set of question marks about, well, what are these accounts? What actually are they, and what features do they have, and how can they act in the world? And I don't think we've resolved that. And it may be different in different sectors at different times in different countries. So it might be quite non-standard in that respect.
Thank you, Jen.
Are there other questions? If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your question. Tim, you have any question or any comment?
Yeah, I'm interested in the sustainability assurance aspect. Just following on from the previous speaker, I think sustainability assurance would have a part to play, but I think that's still evolving. So I just wondered what Professor would comment on that, really, whether sustainability assurance could have a part to play in this.
Yeah, and thanks for that question, Tim. And I'm not an assurance specialist, so I'm going to give you an answer from someone out of their depth in the field, if you like. So I am quite mainly I'm uncertain about all sorts of things, but I'm uncertain about the nature of some of that assurance. So some of it, particularly if it's quite limited, then actually it's not giving you a lot of assurance about performance levels or things you might want to look at. So whether or not it's limited or broader assurance would be certainly one part of it. what I do hear when I talk to companies, but also to professional accounting bodies, is that the assurers, if you have them, are sort of choking off some data that people are trying, maybe being interested in releasing and providing to the world, because they can't assure it, or they don't feel comfortable with assuring what that is. So I think that if assurance is going well, then assurance and reporting would run together, but I would really worry if assurance is choking off reporting. But then a bunch of stuff that has no quality control with it as well isn't that helpful either. So hence I am quite confused on that matter. But I suppose one of the things that I find interesting about some of these collective sets of reports is that things like the World Benchmarking Alliance evaluation and listing, that's been through a quality control assurance process before they say things about that. So there's, if you like, a whole different set of quality measures to figure out what's going on there. So I think yeah, assurance is a pretty tough one, really, in a way. But yeah. Also hearing, and I've only heard this the last couple of weeks, so I don't know how true it is, or if we have any Canadian firms on colleagues on the line, that as some of the regulations are coming in about false advertising, that companies are withdrawing their corporate reports from the public domain, which makes me worry about the quality of their reports. But the key is that for, I know, for example, in the courts in Chile, if you are in the environmental court, what you said in your sustainability report can be used, what can be used against you, I suppose, is what we're saying, can be used as saying, but you said you were in control of A, B, and C, you clearly weren't, and that it can result in punitive damages. So in some ways, it might have been better of not to said anything than to claim that you had things under control. So I think that green advertising legislation, which started off in Australia, but which is sort of, evolving across the whole of the globe in different places, could have an unintended side effect of choking off sustainability reporting. It might result, though, in what reporting there is to be more robust and of a better quality. So that's also something that I've found fascinating to be aware that that's going on somewhere.
Thank you for that.
Are there other questions? Dr. Tariq, you have any comment? Professor Atur, do you have any questions or any comment? If are any questions, you can open your mic and ask your question. Professor Cooper?
Yes. So can I
Yes.
come in,
Yes.
Mohammed?
Yes, you are very welcome.
Thank you once more to organizing this event. It's always a pleasure to listen to John. John, the question I was thinking of and some of the concern raised about the current practices of sustainability report. And this is something I also talk about with my own students in the classroom when I teach sustainability accounting. There seems to be an awful lot of focus on the account produced by the companies only, but that is not the only account available in the public domain. And as you correctly, I think, mentioned sometimes during the presentation, there are also all sorts of other accounts produced by non-reporting entities, then the people who are really trying to understand the sustainability performance of a reporting entity, if we look at all these accounts together to give us a fuller picture, but I can see that most of the time these non-reporter accounts are neglected or public are less aware of. Do you have any thoughts there?
I think you diagnose that situation accurately. I think the public aren't necessarily aware of them. But if we are, I think that's a really interesting research question to address, is to look at, maybe the formal reports and then the counter reports associated with a particular company and its activity. And this used to go on, particularly in the 1970s and the early to late 1970s. There was much more of a culture of counter information, and there was indeed a company called the Counter Information Services, but also sometimes described under the heading of external social audit. So I think it's an empirical question and absolutely would be right for research.
If I could ask one more question, Jan, just to have your thoughts on the question raised on the sustainability assurance. The concern that I have there with the current practice is sustainability assurers appointed by the management of the reporting organization, and many of the times they seem to be reporting back to them, which you can clearly see from the addressee of the sustainability assurance. And these are then labeled as the independent third party assurance. I mean, do you see any problem there?
With proviso that, again, this isn't my research area, if that's quite different from somebody assuring financial data to external members. So it is a different market in that respect, and that it's an internal market. So you contract somebody to assure your report, and you want to hear from them, the letter to management as to what that might look like. If you want them to be then very robust, you'd need to look at the nature of the assurers and their professional bodies, what they adhere to, etc. So that professionalization element as to assurers, who they are, to whom are they reporting, even if they have a contract with the company, do they have broader responsibilities? I think that's where, if you like, some of that might be opened up. But again, like the same with Tim, with proviso, is that I read assurance papers and I'm very interested in observing the practice, but it's not my area of expertise at all. So I might be talking out of a hole in my hat.
Thank you, Jan.
Are there other questions? If anyone have any questions, you can open your mic and ask your question. Thank you very much, dear Professor Jan, for your contribution and your effort. Thank you, everyone, join us today, and thank you very much for taking the time to present to us.
That's all right. Thank you for drawing us together, and I hope everyone, whenever it comes, has a nice break over the weekend. If you can take a wee break.
Thank you very much.
Okay, lovely to see you all, Jerry.
Yeah, and I hope to see you soon in Egypt. You are very, very welcome.
Thank you. I'm sure I am.
Of course, we are going to organize an amazing trip for Jan. Don't worry, Mohammed. We just need free time for her, because she always has a busy schedule.
Salah is trouble, I tell you. Good to see you, Salah.
Yeah, okay. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.